Hello, and welcome to the first in a series of videos produced by the Hofstra Law Library reference librarians about using AI for legal research. By way of introduction, my name is Isaac Samuels, and I am one of the reference librarians working on this project for the Hofstra Law Library. This is the first in a series of videos produced by my colleagues and I to introduce you to the latest tool for legal research, artificial intelligence. The presentation will be broken down into 6 parts. I will take you through the first 2, this introduction, and an introduction to the various tools, some of them at least, that can be used for research, at which point one of my co-librarians will take over, and so on and so on. So what exactly is AI? Well, this gets rather technical and philosophical. I think, therefore I am. Does that mean if this thinks it's alive? What exactly is intelligence? What exactly is thinking? But that's a little too deep for what we're doing right now, and I'm not a philosopher. So for our purposes, we're going to keep it simple. AI is a machine or program that simulates human intelligence to facilitate interaction and usability. So basically what we're saying is the AI is going to be more of like interacting with a person rather than typing into a database. You can be more conversational, ask follow-up questions, and that sort of thing. So since AI is a person, quote unquote, does that mean we no longer need attorneys or that attorneys are going away? And the answer to that is thankfully no. AIs are just another tool for attorneys to use to expedite and refine tasks like legal research. And attorneys have been using tools to assist in legal research for centuries. You've all used secondary sources before, but as a quick refresher, a secondary source is any resource that explains, summarizes, or helps a researcher find a primary source, which is the law. So you can think of legal encyclopedias, head notes on West and Lexis, American law reports, or any other treatise that you've used. And you know from using these that just because you have a good treatise or secondary source, does that mean that the treatise can craft an argument for you? The answer is no. Does that mean it's going to tell you that the law is definitely correct? No, you have to check. So AI is merely the latest evolution of secondary sources. It can help you explain the law, and it can help you move more efficiently, but ultimately the responsibility is on you to craft your arguments and to make sure that everything is correct. Now, you're going to be hearing this from me at least twice and from my colleagues also. Remember that you are the person responsible ultimately for what comes back because you're submitting it under your signature. And the AI can't be sued for malpractice or sanctioned, but you sure can. So make sure to keep that in mind and be very careful when using AI tools. So what tools exist for AI research? Well, I like to say it's not a matter of if AI will be incorporated into legal research or legal practice more generally. It already is. It's here. Firms are using it to streamline tasks, to increase productivity. And you have a great opportunity here to learn the different tools that will help you as this next evolution comes to pass. So I'm sure you're getting sick of hearing about different legal research tools. Every company seems to have their own Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and you might already have tried out some programs like ChatGPT that do more general internet research. But in addition to these generalized products, there are some companies offering AI assistants that are dedicated specifically to legal research. Now, why is that an advantage over a general tool? Well, legal research AIs are focused on one specific task. For example, legal research. So more resources are dedicated to that assignment than, say, a general tool, which might scrape different types of things from the internet, social sciences, that sort of thing. And this makes mistakes less likely. You might have heard some horror stories about ghost citations or phantom citations, ChatGPT or other products making fake citations so it looks like a professionally written document, but it really is just gobbledygook. So, like we said before, you have to check citations for legal research, but using a legal research dedicated tool makes this less likely. But again, definitely still check before you submit anything. So one of two tools that we're going to talk about today is Protege, which is an AI produced by LexisNexis. Protege is a closed universe of case law codes, rules, constitutions, decisions, etc., that is available through your LexisNexis account. It's a closed universe, meaning that it's limited solely to Lexis. It's not going to scrape the entire internet. It's going to find only sources that are verified by Lexis and will help by presenting them in a way that's going to be useful for a legal research professional. The most basic task you can do on Protege is simply using the Ask feature. You can limit your question by jurisdiction or by civil versus criminal. You can really ask it anything you want, but if you want to test it out with a sample question, here's one that I've used. What is an ocean-going vessel in New York? So you can type that into the Ask feature on Protege, and after it processes, it will give you an answer with sources linked to items on Lexis. So you can click the sources and view them to verify them. It can also suggest follow-up questions to continue the conversation. Now, not to be outdone, of course, Westlaw has their AI product, which is called CoCounsel. The Westlaw AI is the same as the Lexis one in the sense that it is a closed universe, but rather than fishing in the LexisNexis pond exclusively, it's fishing in the Westlaw pond exclusively. So it's going to have similar functions. It's going to find case law codes, rules, etc. But again, it's going to be tied to Westlaw. Now, it's got other functions, just like Protege. You can do drafting, research, summarizing, etc. But like we said on Protege, we're going to only stick to the legal research aspect of it because this is a very brief introduction to legal research, and you can check out the other tools. I highly recommend that. But right now, we're going to focus on that legal research component. And CoCounsel lets you ask a general question like Protege, but you can also use subcategories called skills to kind of narrow your focus a little bit or narrow yourself to the part of the AI that'll be most useful. And that can be helpful, but it isn't mandatory. So you get two options with CoCounsel for your results: AI-assisted research or search and summarize. AI-assisted will limit it to primary sources, and search and summarize rather will supplement with trusted secondary sources. So you can test this out by asking CoCounsel the same question that we asked on Protege. What is an ocean-going vessel in New York? And once it processes, you'll see that CoCounsel provides an answer with links to sources on Westlaw, whereas Protege provided answers with links to sources on Lexis. CoCounsel also lets you break down your results by cases, statutes, regulations, etc., if that will help you to narrow your focus. So this is a very, very, very basic intro to artificial intelligence and some of the tools available to a legal research professional. If you have any questions about these tools, you can always contact us at the reference email above, and we will provide links below the video that will take you to Lexis and Westlaw's dedicated pages for helping with their AI products. Thank you very much for listening. I'm going to turn it over to one of my co-librarians for the next part of this. Happy researching.
Hello, this is Lisa, Associate Director of the Law Library and Reference Librarian. In this video, we will discuss tips and suggestions for effective prompting when using generative AI for legal research. First, let's define our terms. What is prompting and why do you care? Prompting is essentially figuring out what it is you need to research, what's your legal question, and then figuring out how to ask that question. Now, of course, you've been doing this when you search traditional Lexis and Westlaw or even Google. What makes it so different, and why should we be talking about it with generative AI? The quality of what you ask the AI will make a big difference in the quality of the answer the AI gives you. So what are some basic guidelines for creating effective prompts? Try different prompts. Phrasing a question differently may provide a better response or may clarify an issue you don't yet clearly understand. Trying different prompts and experimenting is really a theme of this video. Another good guideline to keep in mind is to provide overall context. Write a clear, concise, and focused query. Here are some aspects to keep in mind in order to do that. If you know any of these, your practice area, cause of action, etc. Keep in mind when using a legal AI that your strategy may be different than what you may be used to if you use a more general AI like ChatGPT. Okay, these are pretty general guidelines. What do they mean in practice? So first, advice on trying different prompt styles. Here are a couple of examples. You can describe a situation with the facts and issue, kind of like when you see a hypothetical, or you can ask a direct legal question. Typically, but not always, asking the direct question will be a better strategy. You might try that first, but describing the situation can sometimes be effective as well. You can try both more specific, detailed prompts, and then you can try a different, broader prompt, which is with a more general question. Again, experiment, see what works best. Experiment also with an explicit direction to find cases or other primary source types like statutes or regulations, and then try a different prompt without that explicit direction to find cases. Let's see an example of that on Westlaw's AI platform. Here I am in regular Westlaw. I'm going to use the AI Assisted Research tab. That's part of Westlaw's CoCounsel AI platform. You can also try that as well. And here's where I would enter my question. You'll notice I've limited the jurisdiction here in the filter. Here you will see the results of a direct question to the AI. Does the ADA require an employer to reassign an employee to a vacant position as a reasonable accommodation? And the results from our direct question is a pretty straightforward answer. The ADA does not require an employer to reassign, and then it gives a little bit of explanation, and then some qualifications and some citations to cases. An alternative approach is to try to add an explicit request to find and summarize the best cases that discuss whether the ADA requires an employee to reassign an employee. And here you see slightly different results. You see a briefer explanation about what the ADA requires, and then you see a numbered list of some of the aspects of the issue that you would want to consider. So asking explicitly to find cases gives us slightly different results. Whatever prompt style you use, you want to make sure to include the legal context and material facts. What this means is that if you know it, you want to refer to the legal standard, and if you know what the material facts are, you want to make sure to include them as well as your specific question. So here's an example of a prompt or a query that's pretty basic. What are the defenses to a securities fraud claim? There's no specific reference to a standard or particular facts. Here is a better prompt or query which provides you the specific legal standard, the Securities Exchange Act, the specific rule, 10b-5, and then goes on to also include the material facts about false representations regarding earnings, as well as the company claiming it did not know the statement was false or misleading. So in the circumstances where you do know the legal standard, the Securities Exchange Act in this example, or the material facts, make sure to include them in your prompt or query. Also, when thinking about the legal context and material facts, make sure to avoid non-material facts. Do not include anything extraneous. Each term should be essential. Here's an example of a query with lots of non-material facts. It's talking about the sustaining a back injury and lifting patients and other heavy objects. Lots of extraneous information here. A better query would be the more targeted focus. Does the ADA require an employer to reassign an employee to a vacant position as a reasonable accommodation? Note, a shorter query can sometimes be a better one. Sometimes a longer query is going to be a better one, again, if you are including the relevant standards and material facts. You want to include your jurisdiction when it's appropriate. You can specify the jurisdiction either in the text of your prompt, or you can use the AI filter that you will see on the various systems where available. You want to focus on a single issue or question, and then you use a follow-up prompt for additional question. So for example, here is a prompt that contains a couple of different questions. Our ADA question requiring an employer to reassign employee, and whether has the employee satisfied their requirement for providing notice. A better, more effective way to run this query is to first run the query, does the ADA require an employer to reassign the employee? And then after you get your AI results, ask your follow-up query, does an employee's request to be reassigned to a vacant position constitute providing notice? Of course, you want to avoid including proper names, but also avoid using the litigation role. You want to use the party's role in the issue, so for example, employer or employee in our ADA example, rather than their role in the litigation, plaintiff or defendant. Here's a different prompt with a different example where in this example you don't want to use the word plaintiff. Instead, the better prompt or query, you want to use the role in the issue, employer, primary beneficiary, intern, and employee. I've talked about the usefulness of using follow-up prompts. You want to experiment with different types of follow-up prompts. So you can use follow-up prompts to clarify or ask additional questions. So here's a different issue. In New York, can paternal grandparents obtain visitation rights for their grandchild when the father has ceased to utilize his visitation rights and the mother objects? Note, we know some of the material facts here and have included that in the query. In the course, in your answer from the AI, you may learn some follow-up issues. So here's an example of a good follow-up query. How does the court evaluate best interests of the child in visitation cases? So you may have learned best interest is an important aspect of this issue, and you can use it in a follow-up query. Another type of follow-up prompt you might want to try is called a meta prompt. Here are a couple of examples of meta prompts. You're basically asking the AI to help you. One I particularly like is ask me what other information you might need to answer this question. So in this query, the same issue as just before. In New York, when can grandparents sue for visitation rights to their grandchildren? Here I might not know. This is an example where I don't know what the material facts are. I don't know what the standard is. So it's a very basic question. Knowing that I don't know much about the issue, I may want to run this query and then run a follow-up query or prompt, ask me what other information you might need to answer this question. I'll show you an example of this using Lexis's AI. Here on Lexis, we are looking at Lexis AI called Protege, and here's where I would want to ask a legal question. So in looking at how Lexis would handle our question, in New York, when can grandparents sue for visitation rights to their grandchildren? We see the basic answer, can sue for visitation rights. We see the reference to the applicable statute, and the AI gives us some basic information about that and starts to talk about the cases interpreting that statute. Of course, you want to check out those cases and look at the Lexis related material, which can give you some other background for your issue. And here we see the results for our follow-up prompt, our meta prompt, ask me what other information you might need to answer this question. And here The AI provides us with a bulleted list of some of the aspects we may want to consider. Clarification of equitable circumstances, factors for determining best interest, so the AI has highlighted for us that best interest is important if we didn't know that. Impact of parental objections, so we now know parental objections is an important material fact. Alexis, if you go to the end of your results, you will also see some suggested follow-up questions. These can be really useful in highlighting aspects you may not know about or giving you help on phrasing a particular prompt. So to summarize, experiment, the theme of this video. Try lots of different prompts and experiment, but always make sure to evaluate each and every prompt. Here are examples of what we discussed and techniques to try: a broad basic question versus very specific questions with more details, meta prompts, instructions versus questions, so instructions to find cases as opposed to just a direct legal question. Include legal context and material facts when you know them, and avoid those non-material facts. Use follow-up prompts for additional questions. Take advantage of suggested prompts where available. Remember, generative AI is changing so fast. What works or doesn't work today may change tomorrow. Here are resources for additional information. To view these slides, go to where you found the link for this video. Good luck!
Hello, my name is Carolyn Hasselman, and I will now demonstrate a few ways you can use Westlaw's CoCounsel and Lexis's Protege, the generative AI tools from Westlaw and Lexis, to conduct legal research. Using CoCounsel and Protege should be just an additional step in your research process. Think of these tools as another secondary source to consult. Generative AI should supplement your research and not replace it. Like other traditional secondary sources, Protege and CoCounsel can provide basic information on your topic and refer you to relevant primary and secondary materials. And, like other secondary sources, these tools can be helpful at the beginning of your research process. However, you may also find it helpful to go back to the generative AI tool once you've done some preliminary research on your issue. Given the nature of prompting, this knowledge will help you construct a better prompt which should produce a better response. You should verify every response and review and evaluate the sources cited. You can then use the information and sources provided in conjunction with other various traditional legal research techniques to expand on your research. Now, before we run some prompts through Protege and CoCounsel, let's talk about some of the limitations of these tools, and note that this is, of course, not an exhaustive list. You generally can't do a comprehensive document retrieval. For example, asking for all New York Court of Appeals cases on a particular issue. Protege and CoCounsel will provide some cases, but certainly not all. You can't replicate a search, so if you run the same search twice, you won't necessarily get the same response. Only certain resources on Westlaw and Lexis are available to CoCounsel and Protege. In other words, Protege and CoCounsel will not be consulting all available resources on Lexis and Westlaw when responding to your prompt. For example, as of April 2025, Protege includes primary law and some secondary sources, but CoCounsel only includes cases, statutes, and regulations, no secondary sources. Also be aware that the content available to Protege and CoCounsel will most likely continue to change in the future. And finally, this is not a one-stop shop. You will need to use other research methods and sources to complete your research. Relying on Protege or CoCounsel alone is not sufficient. So let's take a closer look at both CoCounsel and Protege. But first, let's start with a hypothetical. Your client was hit from behind and injured in a motor vehicle accident. The other driver had a blood alcohol level above the legal limit and was seen acting aggressively while drinking for hours at a local pub prior to the accident. Your task is to research whether your client has a cause of action against the pub that sold alcohol to the other driver. And the jurisdiction is New York. So here I am in Westlaw, and I'm going to access CoCounsel from the top. And I am going to put in my prompt. In New York, does someone injured by an intoxicated driver have a cause of action against the establishment that sold alcohol to the intoxicated driver? Now, I can select the research skill if I want, but given the nature of my prompt, CoCounsel will know that I'm conducting legal research. So I'm going to submit my prompt. Note that there was no place to select a jurisdiction, so I've just put the jurisdiction in my prompt here. And I am going to say, yes, I'm going to start AI-assisted research. I do not want to limit myself right now to the search and summarize practical law. Now, because CoCounsel does take a few minutes to respond, I ran this prompt earlier, and I'm going to switch tabs to that response. So as you can see, CoCounsel responds that yes, the injured person could have a cause of action, and it references the Dram Shop Act, which is a new term of art for me, and the relevant statute in General Obligations Law, Section 11-101. And this law states that any person injured by an intoxicated person has a right of action against any person who unlawfully sold liquor to the intoxicated person, causing or contributing to the intoxication. Further down, we see reference to Alcoholic Beverage and Control Law, Section 65, which makes it unlawful to sell alcohol to any visibly intoxicated person. So after reading through the response, I may want to ask a more detailed follow-up question. Now, each platform, CoCounsel and Protege, limits the number of follow-up questions you can ask. I may want to follow up to get more insight into this visibly intoxicated standard. So what I'll do is I'll select the follow-up button here, and I will put my follow-up prompt here. What are the factors considered by New York courts when determining whether someone was visibly intoxicated under New York's Dram Shop Act and Alcoholic Beverage and Control Law, Section 65? Now again, because CoCounsel takes a few minutes to respond, I submitted this follow-up prompt as well, and it's just right below my initial prompt. And as you can see, it is referencing the General Obligations Law again and Alcoholic and Beverage Control Law, and going into more about this visibly intoxicated standard with citation to various cases. Below each response, you'll see this View All Cited Sources button. And if you select that, you will pull up the relevant resources and snippets list that lists the primary sources cited in the response. And if I collapse this list, I can see that there are additional sources listed here as well. Importantly, there are additional secondary sources listed. Now, these secondary sources were not used to formulate the response, but they are sources that CoCounsel decided may be of interest to you. So now, from my conversation, I now have this new term of art in Dram Shop that I could use possibly in keyword searches as I continue my research. I have more context and information on a possible Dram Shop cause of action. And I have relevant primary and secondary materials to review, specifically 2 statutes and many, many cases. So I will want to read the primary sources cited in these responses and use those sources to further my research. So if I go back to my response, if I want to get more information and take a look at this General Obligations Law, I can select the footnote associated with the General Obligations Law, and that will pull up a snippet of the statute. And if I select the section here, it will pull up in a new tab. And here I'll be able to read the entire statute, and then I can also use the notes of decisions to find additional cases that will further my research, or use KeyCite and the citing references to find additional cases that way as well. I can also use the Context and Analysis tab, which will provide me further insight into the statute and references to additional secondary sources as well. I can also access a case I thought was relevant and review the case. So if I go back to my response, let's see, I review this case. If I select the footnote relating to the case, again, I can read a little snippet. If I want to read the whole case, I can select the case there. And again, opening up a new tab, I can read the entire case. I can use the citator KeyCite to find additional citing references, or I can use the headnotes of the case to find additional cases on my topic. So let's move over to Lexis and Protege. I will access Protege here on the left side menu. Now, in my previous example, I asked more of an open-ended question and got more specific by asking follow-up questions. If you're able, you can be more specific at the outset. See our discussion on prompting for more information on how to best construct your prompts. Now, if I had some prior knowledge of the Dram Shop Act, but wanted to know more about how the visibly intoxicated standard applied to my facts, I may want to run Ask Protege this question and put in this prompt. I'm going to put it in, I'm in the Ask section here under Ask a Legal Question. Does a high blood alcohol level and aggressive behavior constitute being visibly intoxicated under New York's Dram Shop Act, General Obligations Law, Section 11101, and Alcoholic Beverage Control Law, Section 65? Now here in Lexis, I can select my jurisdiction, so I'm going to select New York and apply that. I can also specify the content I want. I am going to say I want civil and criminal content, and I am not going to include unpublished or unreported decisions. And I will submit that prompt. Now again, because Lexis takes a few minutes to respond, I ran this prompt earlier, so I'm going to switch tabs to this response. And you can see it talks about how blood alcohol content alone is not sufficient. Then it goes on to talk about aggressive behavior. In the response, and if I scroll down even further, here I have a list of the content supporting the response. So a list of everything cited in the response is hyperlinked here. Further down, if I select View Related Material, this is pulling up even more cases, statutes, practical guidance that are relevant, and secondary sources as well. I'm going to press the back button here. Further down, Lexis provides suggested follow-up prompts and also follow-up tasks as well. Now, again, you'll want to review the sources cited and use those sources to further your research. For example, if I click on this New York Court of Appeals case here, this will pull up the entire case that I will want to review and read. I can then use the LexisNexis headnotes and shepherdize the document to find additional materials as well to further my research. If I want to go back to my Protege conversation, I can select the browser's back button, or I can select Protege here on the top right, and this will pull out a window that has my current conversation with Protege right here. Okay, so this was my prompt and the response. So if I want to ask a follow-up question, I can just ask that, put that in right here. So this has been a review of one way to use CoCounsel and Protege for legal research. For additional information or help, you can contact your reference librarians at lawreference@hofstra.edu or see the Gen AI materials made available by Lexis and Westlaw.
Hello, this is Kevin Shelton, Reference and Government Documents Librarian. In this video, we will explore the ethical implications of artificial intelligence, or AI, in the practice of law. Given its ubiquity in so many areas, including the legal profession, AI itself needs no introduction. But with the increasing use of AI in the legal profession will also come great responsibility, and that does require careful consideration. Attorneys must ensure that AI tools are used ethically, reliably, and within the bounds of professional responsibility. To that end, never forget that generative AI is but one tool of many. It does not replace traditional legal research. So, what does ethics mean in legal research? For purposes of this discussion, ethics refers to a set of guiding principles to determine what is considered to be right and wrong behavior in order to ensure fairness, justice, and integrity. In legal research, using AI raises ethical questions about accuracy, confidentiality, accountability, and equity. Now, why does this matter? Among other reasons, as future lawyers, you are bound by codes of professional responsibility. For instance, the ABA Model Rules of Professional Conduct, which already impose ethical obligations that relate to the use of AI in legal research and practice. Now, how is AI used in legal research? Well, AI tools identify and analyze case law, statutes, contracts, and other legal documents, and they predict outcomes using vast accumulations of data known as large language models, or LLMs. Examples of current tools in use include Westlaw Precision / CoCounsel, Lexis Plus Protege, ChatGPT, and many others. AI will obviously accelerate your routine and even non-routine tasks, but it also introduces ethical challenges that you will need to consider. So here, let's focus specifically on some key ethical concerns that surround AI in legal research and practice. Before we begin, however, note that this discussion applies to generative AI generally and not just to specific platforms such as Lexis, Westlaw, or ChatGPT. First, let's consider some of the problems related to accuracy and reliability. AI tools can be powerful research aids, but they are not infallible. When they are not properly trained or updated, they can produce inaccurate or misleading legal information. These hallucinations or confabulations may prove very problematic. As an example, consider the 2023 case of a New York lawyer who relied on ChatGPT for legal research. The AI-generated brief contained fabricated case law which went unnoticed until it was presented in court. The result? Sanctions against the attorney, as well as a stark reminder that AI must be used as a starting point and not as unquestioned authority. Note that an AI tool may also miss key precedents that could be relevant to a cause of action as well. So remember ABA Model Rule 1.1. Competence in legal representation requires thoroughness and preparation. The lesson here then is straightforward. AI can assist, but lawyers must verify. Now we have some issues relating to bias and fairness. AI models learn from historical data, but if the data contain biases, then the AI will replicate and even amplify them. A major example is the Compass Risk Assessment tool, which is used in criminal justice to predict recidivism rates. Studies have shown that Compass disproportionately classifies black defendants at a higher rate to reoffend compared to white defendants, even when controlling for similar prior histories. AI can also perpetuate biases embedded in its training data, thus skewing legal advice. For instance, an AI tool may overrepresent cases favoring corporations due to dataset bias, and in that way give individual plaintiffs a misleading impression of their potential for successful litigation. So, the ethical takeaway? Blind trust in AI can perpetuate injustice. Attorneys must question the fairness of AI-driven conclusions and ensure that they do not reinforce discrimination. Now let's consider some of the issues raised by confidentiality and data privacy. Confidentiality is a cornerstone of ethical legal practice, but AI tools introduce new risks. If sensitive client data are processed without proper safeguards, then breaches may occur. For instance, AI-powered document review platforms handle vast amounts of confidential data. If these tools are not compliant with privacy regulations, then attorneys could face legal consequences. Therefore, legal professionals must monitor AI providers carefully and ensure that data protection is a top priority. In particular, it is advisable that AI tools be evaluated for security, for instance, encryption, compliance, before use. Now let's think a little bit about accountability and liability. When AI makes an error in legal research or practice, who is responsible? The attorney, the developer, the firm? Consider an AI-powered contract analysis tool that misinterprets a key provision, which leads to a major financial loss. If a junior attorney working at a firm but not yet fully admitted to the bar relies on AI's flawed contract analysis, and a client loses a deal and sues, then where does liability fall? AI is like this junior or not yet admitted attorney. Its results also require supervision. In this regard, keep in mind ABA Model Rule 5.3 regarding supervision of non-lawyer assistants. This includes AI. So our takeaway here is that you are the one who is responsible, not the AI. Use it as a tool, not as a decision maker. As AI becomes more integrated into legal work, accountability must be clearly defined. Legal professionals must maintain oversight and ensure that AI-driven conclusions are cross-checked. Now let's consider the ethical use of predictive analytics. AI can now predict case outcomes with impressive accuracy. But is it ethical to use such tools to shape legal strategy? Of course, some firms do already use existing tools to analyze judges' past rulings, which help attorneys to predict, for instance, how judges might respond to specific motions. So while this practice may provide a strategic advantage, it raises ethical concerns about fairness and manipulation. The ethical question here is, will innovations in predictive AI that go far beyond the existing tools improve justice, or will they tip the scales unfairly? This is an evolving debate that legal professionals may have to navigate carefully. Saving the obvious for near the end, of course, AI must comply with legal ethics codes. It will have to align with existing legal codes such as the ABA Model Rules of Professional Conduct and ABA Ethics Opinions. For instance, ABA Formal Opinion 498, 2021 emphasizes that lawyers must understand the technology they use, and in particular, they must consider the ethical implications of the technology that they use, including AI. Simply adopting AI without knowing its limitations could lead to ethical violations. The key takeaway here, competency in AI is no longer optional. It is an ethical obligation. Now, on the other hand, let's not focus purely on the potentially negative. There are potential ethical benefits to using AI in legal practice and legal research, such as enhancing access to justice. For instance, AI makes legal research faster and cheaper, thus helping underserved clients. As an example, say a nonprofit uses Ross intelligence quickly to research tenant rights, thus aiding low-income renters. The ethical tie here is that this aligns with the ethical duty to promote justice in ABA Model Rule 6.1 relating to public service. Our takeaway here is that AI may also democratize legal assistance if used responsibly and thoughtfully. So before we conclude, let's consider some guidelines for ethical AI use. Double-check AI research results manually to ensure accuracy. Always use secure and compliant tools to safeguard client data. Inform clients when AI is used in their case. Understand how AI works so that you can better spot biases or errors, and combine AI with human judgment for ethical practice. Now, what is the future of AI and ethics? Well, the trends, I think we can safely assume that AI tools will grow more comprehensive and thereby raise new ethical dilemmas. Regulators may also set stricter AI guidelines, for instance, ABA rules updates or new formal opinions. So your role as new lawyers will be to help to shape ethical standards for AI use. So ask yourselves, how will you ensure that AI serves justice and not just efficiency? So in conclusion, the responsible use of AI. As we conclude our general presentation, here are some key points to remember. AI is a starting point, not an endpoint. Always verify its output. Different AI tools have different strengths and weaknesses. Understanding these differences is essential. Effective prompting is critical. The quality of AI-generated results depends on how you ask your questions. Ethical responsibility in the use of AI is non-negotiable. Check AI-generated citations, be wary of AI hallucinations or confabulations, and always do your utmost to ensure accuracy. So AI is reshaping the legal profession, but it is up to us to use it competently, ethically, responsibly, and above all, wisely. Thank you for your time and interest. If you have any questions, then feel free to contact us or to visit us at the reference desk.